Hello, everybody, and welcome to Brilliant Darkness. This may seem like an odd pairing, but I'm a theoretical physicist with an interest in mysticism. It's probably not quite what you think, so I hope you enjoy this video. Mysticism is one of those words that can mean a lot of things, so what do I mean by it? Essentially, what I mean by it is it's a mode of understanding the world, experience, without making reference to thought. Most people think that in order to understand anything at all, you need to think about it. But as much as thought is a useful tool for understanding things, it can also be a hindrance. Take, for example, a map. A map is an extremely useful tool if you want to navigate, and most of us do just fine understanding that a map is not actually the real place we're trying to get to. It's a representation. But that's because we're adults. When I was in college, I took a child psychology class, and in it we learned about how kids develop over time and what sort of cognitive abilities and lack of abilities they have at different ages. So, when they're young, kids can't really use maps. They just see it as a physical object. They don't understand that it's a representation of things. So, if you show a child of a certain age a map and you hide cookies in a room and you point to a place on the map of the room and say the cookies are here, they'll have no idea what you're talking about. As they get older, though, they reach a certain developmental stage where when you point to a certain place on the map and say the cookies are here, they understand that this corresponds to a location in the room. They can go and get the cookies, and they're very happy. But something interesting happens, which is that when the map looks more and more like a physical object in its own right, they have a harder and harder time distinguishing between it as an object and it as a representation. So if you take a child who's just barely learned how to use a map, and they can use the map just fine, but you would now show them a diorama of the room. A diorama looks much more physical and real than does a map. And then you do the same sort of thing where you point to a place in the diorama and you say, the cookies are here. That child will no longer be able to find the cookies. There's yet another later developmental stage that they must go through before they can understand that the diorama is a representation. So this is an example of how thought which is representative can be a hindrance to understanding. If you don't understand that a map or a diorama is representative and you just think of it as the actual thing in itself, you'll be very confused. You could imagine the child being instructed by his mother to go and find the cookies on the map. And the mom says, look, the cookies are here. And the child looks at the map and says, what are you talking about? There are no cookies here. You're pointing at a piece of paper. This makes no sense. And so if you don't recognize the representation that you have of the world as a representation, then you're bound to be confused. And we like to think as adults that we've gotten beyond this. We can tell that a map is a map. We can tell that a diorama is a diorama. But are there things in our lives, cognitive faults that we have, that are kind of like what the children have, where we have a map of the world of sorts, but we don't recognize it as a map? And the answer to this is absolutely yes, but it's hard to recognize. Just like as a child, it's hard for the child to understand what's going on with the map. It's hard for us to see through our own cognitive disabilities. And when I say disabilities, I mean that this isn't some sort of unique thing, that there are some small subset of the population that is disabled and can't understand this. This is sort of a universal human phenomenon. And to be able to see through these cognitive problems or illusions requires some amount of effort, at least for most people. There are some quasi-savants who can see through them, but for most people, it requires a lot of effort. The purpose of mysticism, as I see it, and I'll explain in a later video why I call this mysticism, is to see through these kinds of mental constructs that we mistake for reality. So we really are in this same situation as the toddler who can't recognize the map as a map. And but we do this with our thoughts. It's no longer that we're confused by physical objects representing other physical objects. We've hopefully matured to a level of development where we can understand this. It's rather that the thoughts that we have are go unrecognized as thoughts. And we have these concepts that are so useful, we mistake them for being actually the real world itself. And so my hope with these videos is to give you tools to see through these kind of cognitive illusions and have a greater appreciation for how you can understand things without thought. Now, if you're like me, the idea of understanding things without thought might strike you as very strange. It certainly did when I first encountered this notion. But just like you can understand a room without a map, you could just take the child and show them where the cookies are and they can get back to that spot reliably. You don't need the map. And if the map is confusing the child, then you just drop it. Similarly, when the thoughts are something that causes confusion, it can be helpful to just drop them. So what does it mean to understand without thought or beyond thought? It means that you just go directly to experience as it is. You don't try and interpret it. You don't try and create some sort of mental construct, some theory. You just let all of the theories drop away and you observe things as they are, including the thoughts. You observe just everything in your experience as it is. And so the natural tool for this is meditation. Meditation really is the art of dropping back and just noticing. There isn't really anything you need to do. You simply notice. Now, we're conditioned in such a way that it's very hard to not do anything. And so there are various tricks to where you try and do less, and there are various approaches that we'll take here. We'll sort of do a mixed meditation arts approach where you can have I'll sometimes speak very directly about some things and sometimes give you methods of to sort of gradually accustom yourself. But the whole idea is that you need to recognize the thoughts as thoughts and not as the reality itself. So I'll try and be as clear as possible with this, but there's this inherent problem that I'm encountering, which is that in order to explain this, I need thoughts, I need words, I need language. But I'm trying to get you to drop your thoughts and language. And so I may say some things at some times that sound like they're in contradiction. And please don't get bogged down in this. They're just pointers. Don't take anything as the gospel truth. They're just instructions that are meant to help you navigate this sort of esoteric world of meditation and mysticism. So my hope is that through various meditations and sort of theoretical descriptions and sessions, I can help you kind of break through these the illusion that thought casts, and these apparently contradictory statements will make a lot more sense. So, what is the point of all of this? It seems like it might just be some sort of a curiosity that we can mistake our thoughts for reality and get confused, much like the child does when he encounters a map and doesn't know what to make of it. But we get through our lives just fine, and so why do we need this? The answer is that When we mistake our thoughts for reality, this leads to completely unnecessary suffering. And in some sense, this is quite clear. There are many examples of this that you can encounter in your daily life. How often do you imagine that something is going to be really terrible, and so you spend all day worrying about it, or all week, or even longer, only to find out that the terrible thing you were worried about either wasn't that bad or didn't even come to pass at all. So, this is an example of taking your thought about what's going to happen, about the future, and imagining that it's real and something to actually be afraid of, when in fact maybe it isn't real at all. Uh, but the insight that you get from meditation goes much deeper than this level. Now, it certainly does help with this aspect of suffering, but it cuts through suffering like a knife through hot butter, where if you look at any aspect of suffering, even physical pain, and really notice it for what it is, you'll find that it's actually just a neutral sensation, either the sensation of pain, the sensation of sorrow, of fear, anxiety, etc. And then this kind of chaotic web of thoughts on top of it that tell you a story of, oh no, don't let this happen, I don't want this to happen. And the thoughts kind of just appear, and you don't quite notice them. They're very tricky and subtle. And so, by noticing these thoughts as thoughts, it completely robs these apparently negative sensations of their negativity. And so, in principle is key here. If you could do this to the fullest extent, then you would just completely ameliorate all all forms of suffering. Even physical pain would not cause issues. And there are cases of people who meditate through surgeries and are just totally fine. Now, I myself have not reached this kind of level. I'm not quite certain I anticipate to reach this level. But even having a small insight into how this is the case can drastically transform your life and your relationship to your life and to suffering more generally. And so it's my hope that these videos will give you a foot in this kind of door, and you'll start to be able to unravel these cognitive illusions that lead to unnecessary suffering, and it can lead to a much brighter and happier life.